What's going on, everyone? It's Danny Haiphong, of course, contributing editor to the Black Agenda Report and your co-host of the Left Lens. I'm just going to let people come on here. How's everyone doing this evening? Well, wherever you are, it's evening where I am out in the East Coast here in the United States. It is tropical weather. It is raining almost every day. It's humid as hell. I also got that sweet, sweet blood. I don't know if you can relate, that the bugs really like. So being outside at this time is actually cool. Actually quite a lot. I got to put on so much bug spray and all that. But I plan on talking a little bit more personally with you all today. The title of the stream is To Honor the Dead, Fight for the Living. We're going to talk a little bit about Cuba, Haiti, and the recent debates going on with the so-called progressive left. But I will let people come in first. I don't do this very often, and the reason for that is I work. Yeah, that's true. I am mosquito food, for real. It is really bad. I'm not just mosquito food. I'm also black fly. I killed a black fly. I'm out here in New York City. I killed one on my leg. Never happens usually. You know, they're really hard to swat, but I killed one on my leg because I had so many coming at me. It's crazy, but my luck. But anyway, I'm going to let people come on. For any subscriber here to my Patreon, please, just make yourself known because I will answer your questions first. This is sort of like an Ask Me Anything. I don't do these things very often. I can't get on live very often. And the reason for that is I work a full-time job. Actually, economics are quite stressful right now in my particular situation. And so there's a lot of work happening. I got to work a lot. I'm in the social services field. I'm a social worker by trade. And so I'm on here, though. You can always support me. So people who are coming on, be sure to support my Patreon. Of course, throw money to Black Agenda Report, who I contribute to weekly. So anyone, I'll be, if anyone has, thank you. Appreciate the audio. Anyone who has, the audio comments, anyone who has anything they want to ask, I will try to get to. I'll try to scroll through. But first, let me just talk to you about a little bit about myself and why I named the stream what I did. And it's because there are a lot of questions. I get this. I'm on social media. I have Twitter. I have Instagram. I'm on here kind of, right, on behalf, but also on behalf of Black Agenda Report, but also for, myself. I've been kind of heading the YouTube project because it's a tough thing to manage. And I get questions, right? And people wonder why my politics are the way they are. Why do I speak about certain things? Racism, right? Why am I dividing the working class by speaking about white supremacy? Why am I talking about China when China is just a quote unquote authoritarian country? Why do I do these things, right? I get messages about this. I get quite entertaining emails a lot of the times about, China is going to be an imperialist evil greater than the United States. Just you wait. Or why do you talk, why do you talk about racism? Because you're dividing the working class. And so I guess I would like to share with you all, and it's related to what's going on in Cuba. It's related to what's going on in Haiti. It's related to imperialism. I'd like to share with you my experience, why growing up really informed my politics, how my early experiences informed my politics, because I think it's very important. We also have lost some dear comrades in recent weeks. Most recently, for me, Abdus Lukman, who I never got the honor to meet, but just knowing his wife, Jackie, knowing Lukman Nation, being able to speak to him and follow him, that one hit hard. And it hit hard in particular because, we just lost just a couple of years ago, just about 2 years ago now, we lost Bruce Dixon over at Black Agenda Report, who was someone who was very important to my political development and someone who actually helped me a lot when I was before I even came into Black Agenda Report. He was just that type of guy. I mean, we need more of the way that people like Bruce Dixon and Abdus Lukman related to the people open to questions, open to debate, and also just really wanting to move people's consciousness to a higher level. That's where I'm at. So you don't really see me oftentimes. I'm not here to like get into debates and try to, I don't know, own people or whatever it is, but I'm here for the people, and I'm here to talk politics. I'm here to struggle, though, more so. And to do it, my work is all about struggling for the people. It's all about being accountable to the people. And when I say the people, I mean the working class, the oppressed, those who are under the gun of imperialism, and those who face the triple evils that Martin Luther King talked about: racism, capitalism, and militarism, on a regular basis, because I consider myself one of those people, right? And I think we have a lot of voices on here, on YouTube, social media, who treat politics like a brand, who treat it like it's about themselves. And I wrote a piece recently in Black Agenda Report that maybe I will read from a bit, where I asked the question, who are independent journalists accountable to? I know people, and I love, whether it's Margaret Kimberly, Glenn Ford, or whether we're talking about other folks who do this independent media work at the Gray Zone, or Lee Camp, these folks, Jimmy Dore, all of them, they're doing their best to be accountable for the people. And that's where my journalism, I feel, is geared towards. It's not geared towards my own popularity or anything like that. When I say support my Patreon, it really means supporting me to be able to now and in the future be more independent and not have to spend, really, I would say 60-70% of my time away from this kind of work, right? Because I feel like I have gotten a really big head of steam in terms of my writing quality, my analysis, and I want to continue to contribute that to the people and to be involved in these struggles. And I'm talking now just to get people in here. And will you be my guide when I go to China? I would love to do that. I need a guide too, though, because unfortunately, this is one of my goals, is to be able to learn Mandarin, be able to learn the language so I can go there and be more independent. But welcome to any subscribers of my Patreon. Welcome to any subscribers of this channel. Hit the like, do all of that. Thank you for coming. And so I'm just going to get started. What do I mean to honor the dead? I talked about Bruce Dixon and Abdus Lukman, and there's plenty more where that comes from, because we have a lot of folks who have been slain, a lot of our revolutionaries who have been slain, whether it's from health or the stress of this system, or whether it's from outright repression, as we've seen with so many of our political prisoners behind the walls. We have sick political prisoners: Mumia Abu-Jamal, Leonard Peltier, Russell Maroon Shoatz. These revolutionaries in the Black liberation, indigenous liberation movements, they're at risk of dying in prison. And we cannot forget Julian Assange, of course, who's at risk of dying in prison because, all of them, all political prisoners in the United States and the Western orbit, that Julian Assange out in the UK, but we know that he's actually a US political prisoner. They're at risk of dying in prison and being because they're being tortured. They're being punished for their political ideology and their activity. So we have to honor the living. We have to fight for the living. We have to fight for them, right? We have to fight for them. And our journalism, our activism has to be geared to them. It has to be geared to moving people to a higher level, so we have more people, and not even just more people, but that we have strong, politically conscious people entering the movement, entering this struggle, so they can be effective, develop leaders in the struggle at the grassroots level. That's what our journalism should be about, and that's what I'm about. When we have people like Vaush and all these other so-called quote-unquote bread tubers and whatnot, and then TYT, all these news organizations, right? That's not what they're about. They're about reproducing themselves first and doing what's politically expedient at any given moment. And that's not what we're about here. That's not what I'm about. So I just want to make that clear. And I get a lot of questions about my politics, right? Why do I fight against racism? A lot of people assume, they look at me and they see, I don't know, they look at my skin color, say, you're a white guy, right? And, I just want to say that the reason why early in my experience, I was very hyper aware of something like white supremacy, right? This thing that everyone says is divisive, right? Racism, you can't talk, you're dividing the working class. And a lot of socialists, a lot of communists believe this. Well, anyone who grows up in the United States, and it doesn't matter what side you're on, you could be the one being enveloped in racism, or you could be the one who is being targeted by racism. Hold on one second. I'm seeing some light flickering here. Huh. Hold on one second, guys. Yeah, so it's part of the experience. I mean, if you want to deny it, you don't want to talk about it, that's on you. But I'm always going to talk about it. And the reason why that is I can just give, it's not even just, I've had a lot of people in my life die from an early age because of racism, very dear friends. And you could say, okay, well, these aren't direct racist attacks, right? I'm not saying that they were lynched or that they were attacked, but because of the conditions of this system are racist in the sense of institutional, of the system of capitalism and imperialism being inherently racist, and how that really informs the oppression and exploitation of the masses. I've had many friends who have died. I mean, I just growing up, all of the young people in my life that have died were Black. I mean, whether it was a good friend who died of an asthma attack on the basketball court, whether it was a good friend who was shot accidentally by another good friend just because they were playing with a gun, whether it was from suicide, right? I feel like those early experiences, all of those happened before I was 21 years of age, and that taught me at an early age, right? Outcomes were different for people who were not white. None of my white friends really went through that. Even a lot of my white friends were working class themselves, but they didn't have to deal with that kind of predetermined outcome, right? They were struggling economically, but their existence wasn't a threat. And that has always been something that sat with me. And it sat with me not because I was just looking at it, but it sat with me because I knew what it was like to be jumped for being quote unquote Asian, a chink, a gook, whatever it was. I knew what it was like to, be punked every morning. I'm trying to shoot around, have my ball taken away, kicked, whatever, stolen from me at any given time. Those kind of incidents, because of who I was, and always targeted by teachers. You're this, you're the smartest, you're the model minority. Like, I've heard these things directly told to me. And I know how they not only made me feel, but how they shaped my experience. They shaped my material condition in this society. Also growing up with, a Vietnamese mother who struggles a lot with mental illness, struggles a lot with what that experience was like, so-called fleeing Vietnam, being a quote-unquote refugee. Like, all these things, which are huge to my experience, really made it a natural thing for me to, when I was exposed to the literature of Huey P. Newton, when I was exposed to Black Panther Party literature, Black Liberation Movement literature, Black left literature, it just clicked, because it was that literature, it was those organizations, it was the Black movement that was one of the few in the United States that actually expressed solidarity with other people who were experiencing oppression, right? Whether it was here or abroad. You may see some lightning out here, guys, because as I said before, New York City is now a tropical place. But, I wanted to just share that with you because I really do believe to honor the dead, to honor those like Bruce Dixon and Abdus Lukman, we have to fight for the living. We have to be curious about all people's oppression. We have to extend solidarity to oppressed people abroad. We have to always oppose U.S. imperialism. And we have to always talk about what is impeding the class struggle right now. And I can tell you, it is not racism. It is not the discussion about racism. It is not the act of talking about racism. But actually, it's white supremacy itself has always been the hugest barrier to class struggle in the United States. And that is historically demonstrated time and time again in each stage of the US's development, that there has been an intentional policy of racism, institutional, which ensures that the working class, that oppressed people here in this United States are exposed to one of the most vile ways of not only thinking, but of being, right? To live in a society steeped in racism, steeped in this dehumanization of Black people, of Indigenous people, and of anyone who is deemed quote unquote non-white. That has led to not only the justification of so many wars over the course of the US's history, but also it really sits at the foundation of the United States itself. So I'm sure none of you all who have listened to me before are hearing anything really new, but I just wanted to open up and say that those who want to talk about racism as being a distraction, a division, any of that, really are not speaking from a place of reality when it comes to the United States. Because I don't care where you sit, white supremacy is literally at the core of what you have gone through, whether you're towing the line on the side of racism, or you're a target of racism, or you're towing both lines, because we know that nothing about the United States and capitalism and this empire is disconnected, right? We are always living through contradictions and navigating contradictions. Nothing is linear, right? And that's the philosophy that I have adopted over the course of my study of Marxism and socialism. So I just wanted to open with that first. I know there's a lot to talk about with Cuba and Haiti, right? We just saw another destructive event in Haiti with the assassination of Jovenel Moïse. And it's part of this long process of colonization in Haiti and the response to decolonization, the response to the first revolution in the world happened to be led by slaves, African slaves, and who were imported there, forced there by the French and by other colonial powers to then lead this great revolution that was victorious in 1804, only to be punished from thereafter from the French and the United States. The U.S. occupied Haiti in the early 1900s, 1915. I think that was almost 20 years, tens of thousands of Haitians killed. And then after that, one puppet dictatorship after another, siphoning off Haiti's resources to foreign multinational corporations, mainly the United States. 2011, Hillary Clinton has to fly in to enforce the OAS's, the Organization of the American States diktats, to allow, I think it was Sweet Mickey at that time, people can correct me if I'm wrong, to run in a quote unquote runoff where he wasn't even in the running at all in that election. And he ends up being the president, Sweet Mickey, and he was a disaster. You had the UN occupation there, around the same time, bringing cholera. Haiti has been plundered by the United States to the point where workers there are some of the lowest paid in the world. Hunger is rampant. We know what the earthquake did, but we know that austerity and capitalism in the United States and its enforcement of austerity is the problem there. So we have to just be on the lookout on what developments are going on there, but we have to be very clear that we are against U.S. intervention, U.S. militarism. The national police in Haiti already receive millions of dollars of support from the United States, and we know that's going to go up as things in Haiti become more unstable. I mean, there's been protests there for years now. Since 2017, 18, there's been protests there on the regular, and the United States wants to see that curtailed, and they'll exploit anything. And they could very well be behind this assassination, or at least be involved in some way. But we don't have that evidence yet. We can only say that the United States is deeply involved in the Haitian polity, and we need to demand that the United States get out, right? And so it's very important now, and I'll just get to Cuba really quick. Then I'll answer questions from you all. I'll scroll up. I just want everyone, I mean, all these from AOC to Vaush to whoever else it is, just stop. You don't know what you're talking about. I mean, this is the problem with the quote unquote progressive left in the United States. The arrogance, the hubris, the inability to objectively approach a situation that they do not understand. It's so much easier, and again, here comes the racism word. It's so much easier to lean on racism, to lean on imperial hubris, than it is to actually investigate what the heck is going on. I mean, I've been to Cuba. I only went for 5 days, right? So I didn't get the grand experience. My wife, she went for a couple of weeks, a few years before I did. I know several people have gone for much longer than that. I know people have been educated there, Havana University. I have contacts there. You know, it just blows my mind. And there's already been a lot of work done on this question of how people in the United States view Cuba. I believe that honestly, the left in the United States, if anything, has done a lot better of a job being in solidarity with Venezuela and Cuba and others than elsewhere, right? Whether we're talking about Syria or China or Russia or, we can go on and on, Eritrea. We can go on and on and on about the countries, Libya during the 2011 intervention, Zimbabwe to this day, right? The left in the United States, the progressive left, has done a very poor job being in solidarity with those countries, but a better job in Latin America. And I think that's in the Caribbean. I think that's because it's been viewed as the backyard of the United States. There's some closer proximity, and there has been more work done. I mean, the Venceremos Brigade in the United States began in 1969. So there's been literally like more than 50 years of solidarity work between the two. And unlike the Soviet Union, which fell in 1991, unlike the Sino-Soviet split, which occurred in the 1960s, there's been a lot of time where it's literally been just a matter of understanding Cuba from the perspective of how the U.S. approaches Cuba. So there's been a lot more opportunities for people in the United States and the progressive left here and in the West to get it, right? And I think there are more people who do get it. But now we see these protests that have jumped off in Havana, and they're relatively small. The New York Times says hundreds. Of course, Reuters, they say thousands, right? But when you see it, they're relatively small. If anyone's ever been to protests in the United States, and if you've ever been in part of left organizations, they tend to overblow things, right? We say when there's hundreds of people, we say, oh, more than 1,000. When there's really just like a couple hundreds. That's what's being done here with these demonstrations. And we know what the politics of them are. We know that there are people protesting outside of the embassy in DC saying, intervene. I think it was a mayor. Was it the mayor? Who was it? A mayor in Florida mayor. He's a gusano, a worm. That means worm in Spanish, everyone. If you want to know, it means you're a worm. It means you're a traitor. It means you're against the revolution. You're against the sovereignty of Cuba. If you're a gusano, that's a political term used during the revolutionary struggle to describe those who are basically what the comprador, neo-colonial classes everywhere else. You're a traitor. You're a class traitor. You're a traitor to the nation. And, the protests, unfortunately, right, are a byproduct. And I'm not going to say they're a byproduct of sanctions because, to be honest, if there was no U.S. meddling politically, if there was no USAID, there are none of these NGOs, if there wasn't this hugely powerful Miami Cuban, Florida Cuban, and Cuban American, Cuban American population that's very close to the United States government. I mean, these were folks who were during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Bay of Pigs, I should say, during the Bay of Pigs, they were the ones being armed. Their generation, they were being armed to commit terrorism and violence in Cuba to try to overthrow the government. They tried to do it again in the 80s. Didn't really work out for them. If that didn't exist, I don't think that these protests would be happening at all. That's just my opinion. Call that a hot take. The sanctions do have a huge impact, though. When I was in Cuba, I spoke to many people about this because you can see, I was walking through Havana and I was talking to people and they would point to buildings and they would say, you see that paint chipping there? You see that building that looks like it needs not only a paint job, but probably needs a replace, a lot of things fixed, the foundation, etc. It's like the reason why we can't do this, we can't import concrete, we can't import the paint, because what the sanctions do, there's so many little stipulations. The sanctions actually oftentimes force companies abroad, international companies, to do very expensive things just to trade with Cuba. So if you want to avoid, you can get around the sanctions, right? But it's going to cost you a whole lot. So you either pay the huge fine for violating the sanctions, which most companies won't do and can't do. It doesn't matter whether you are, private, public. You can't pay the debt that the U.S. is going to levy on you. Or you can go around the sanctions and choose a different method of distribution. For example, a lot of Cubans would tell me that it was the fact that you couldn't enter Cuban ports, right? Or certain Cuban ports. So you would have to travel around the country in a different direction, which is just inefficient and it's just not going to happen. It ends up costing a whole lot more just to trade with Cuba. And so there's just so much disincentive. And luckily, China and Russia have stepped up a lot because they don't believe in sanctions and they don't believe in unilateral coercive measures, and they firmly oppose them. So China and Russia, to the extent that they can, do negate the sanctions and trade with Cuba. And it's been a huge lifeline over the last several years. So the sanctions have a huge impact, billions of dollars. I think it's like $3 billion alone in the last few years have been lost in just medicine, right? And so all these right-wing gusanos, the Cuban American lobby, the whatever it is, right? These protesters, they're saying, the sanctions aren't our problem. They're not that much of a problem. Cuba can trade with anyone. You can see the clause where it negates medicines. That's a lie. Okay. It's a huge lie that medicines are not affected. I met people in Cuba who would tell me that, doctors can't have access to syringes, for example, for diabetic medication, etc. And that has had a huge impact. They've had to create them themselves. And so when you are unable to import certain things at the tune of billions of dollars over the course of, a year's long period, you fall behind and are unable to grow the economy. So yes, Cuba remains an impoverished country by GDP terms, PPP terms, whatever you want to look at, it's impoverished. But the Cuban Revolution, what they've done is they've said, well, we are going to ensure people's basic needs are met, and then we will try to tackle the larger economic situation. I can't lie. I mean, I know that there are problems in the sense that this new generation, the younger generation, they don't know what it was. They don't know what it was. They don't know what war is like. They know what it's like to live under embargo, but they don't know what it took to win the revolution by personal experience, right? So there has been unrest and disruption when it comes to the youth and trying to develop young people's revolutionary consciousness. And so there's a lot of work to be done. And actually, Cuba's opened up a lot, not just economically, but also politically, and trying to get young people involved, and also trying to get them more independently involved, even from the Communist Party, although the Communist Party will never be undermined. But there's been different approaches there that I learned about when I was there a couple years ago that I think have done a good job, in the sense that these protests that the Gusanos are leading and the United States is trying to support doesn't really have popular support, and you can see it. And I don't think it will be very effective. I think it'll be mostly a social media campaign, but it's very possible that this will roll back some of the progress that's been made in terms of highlighting the embargo and the sanctions and their impact, in terms of how the people in the United States view Cuba, which then leaves people, if the politics move to the right on Cuba, it leaves Cuba vulnerable to possible future intervention, for example. And of course, with any color revolution, there's also this need to defend the country, and that takes away resources from other things, right? So when you're already under sanctions and you have to deal with a color revolution, then that in and of itself harms Cuba and harms the Cuban Revolution. So all solidarity to Cuba. Cuba see Yankee no. We need to stand with Cuba. Cuba has a higher life expectancy than the United States, lower infant mortality rate, best education in Latin America and the Caribbean, one of the best healthcare systems in the world. When I was there, I learned that they have a medication for diabetic ulcers made from some kind of spider venom, and it's a cream, and it heals the ulcers without needing surgery. So I'm sure some of you have heard of the lung cancer vaccine, which prevents symptoms from proliferating and therefore prolongs people's lives who have lung cancer. They also have a diabetic medication, which is just, Cuban science is just amazing. Socialist science is amazing, where yes, it actually heals ulcers and then prevents surgeries and saves probably thousands of people's lives. Sugar is a huge thing in Cuba, guys. So, it was like the cash crop, the product of slavery in Cuba. And so to be able to treat diabetes in this way is revolutionary, and revolutionary for me because I work with a lot of seniors who die all the time from needing surgery for their diabetic ulcers. Because if you get amputations of your foot, your toes, it only gets worse, and it does lead to death, infection, and then death. So incredible stuff. So Cuba needs to be defended. Cuban homelessness, 0, guys. So 90% plus home ownership rate. I think the highest in Cuba that you can pay in your income and rent is like 2%. It's something just egregiously low. And so if you're not going to defend a socialist country that puts the people's needs first, then you're on the wrong side. And there's so many people, AOC, others, who have shown their true colors, as they do all the time when it comes to questions of imperialism, and have failed to defend Cuba. So in effect, we need to defend the Cuban Revolution. And we also, for the larger struggle against imperialism, we need to understand that Cuba falls within the context of this global struggle for liberation, for freedom, for a world where imperialist hegemons do not dominate, and the capitalist class no longer dominates for the sole purpose of their own profits, right? That's what we are fighting against. So if you don't stand with Cuba, you're not really for that. You're not for that kind of liberation. You're not for socialism. So I'll stop there. Those are really my comments. on these issues. So I can scroll down. Thank you so much again. Support me on Patreon if you can. Around the fall, I'm going to be trying to become more independent because I mean, I need a break. I know all of you probably feel this way too. The COVID-19 pandemic, with the shutdowns and the economic crisis and the mass death and all of this stuff. I mean, I'm burnt. I'm spent. I know so many of you probably are too. It's been a really rough last year and a half now, almost, right? And so, yeah, I need to take some time off. I need, I need to figure out stuff. And one of the things I really want to figure out is how to be independent. So support my Patreon if you can, because that allows me to continue to do this work and to put more time into it. Like to be able to not just come on here, but to come in here like prepared with notes and points. I can speak off the cuff, and I think I do an okay job at it, but I'm a preparation guy. I like to write. I like to do monologues. I like that sort of thing. So, it allows me more opportunities to do that. It's hard. It's a lot of work. But I do it for the people. And so, I do it for the vast majority of people, right? That's whose interests I feel like I first of all sit within. That's their interests are my interests, but those are the interests I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for theirs. I'm fighting for peace, socialism, fighting against racism. That's what I do. So I'm just gonna go through this. Ask any questions, subscribers on Patreon. Make yourself known if you have a question. I'll get to you first. So hello, LME. Thanks for joining. Question. Okay, so I got. Will I be your guide to China? To whatever, man. Yeah, I want to learn Mandarin. I want to go back. There's a trip planned in June of next year. Don't know if financially I'm going to be able to do it, but I really want to go. I think Code Pink is going to go. I think some DSA folks are going to go, and I really want to go if possible. They're going to go to Xinjiang, and I want to go. So stay tuned. Question: is it clear by now that most ethnic communities, towns created in the 1950s and 60s, Vietnamese, Cuban, Koreans, simply allowed the USA? It simply were allowed in the USA because they lost CIA-backed wars. I mean, that's a huge part of it. So thank you for bringing up Korea too, because I didn't even talk about them, but that's definitely a huge part of it, right? So brain drain was a huge thing for the United States, and CIA, yes, was a huge part of that. It was a huge CIA strategy to try to undermine socialist revolutions, because Korea, Vietnam, and Cuba, that's what they were experiencing post China, post 1949 Chinese Revolution, post 1917's Russian Revolution. Those were the countries that were in the midst of their struggle as the larger world socialist struggle was happening, and for sure, brain drain was a huge part. That's why a lot of those folks who have emigrated from those countries end up being in the intelligentsia, end up being in the former landlord class, the so-called bourgeois classes, which were not really very developed, right? They weren't very, you couldn't call them hugely wealthy, but in the context of what they were in, they were the exploiters, the compradors, and a lot of them. I'm not going to say all, because the numbers are unclear, but I'm Vietnamese myself. I know the community a bit, and I know that that's huge background. A lot of them do not like the community in Boston. I have a lot of Ho Chi Minh shirts. I go over there with them. Forget about it, right? I'm going to be seen as persona non grata because Ho Chi Minh is seen as a quote unquote dictator. He butchered all these people. Ho Chi Minh was one of the revolutionary leaders of the country, and those so-called people he was butchering was really the National Liberation Front of Vietnam, defending the country from intervention, which even in my family, I know it, they were defending that intervention because they wanted to keep their privileges. Colonialism is not just about, no matter how sophisticated white supremacy and settler colonialism here in the United States, where it feels like it's all about white Americans getting theirs or white people getting theirs, it's also about maintaining control of the colony, of the nation, by ensuring that there is a class of people. The United States didn't do this too well for a while, right? The United States wasn't too good at this until it learned the lesson. Post-revolution, so-called revolution, post quote-unquote independence, learned the lesson that Africans are very rebellious, colonized people are very rebellious. They're not going to just sit down and, be mutilated and suppressed and oppressed and exploited to the point of starvation and death and addiction, etc. People are going to rise up. And so you have to have this comprador class, this elite that represents the great Frantz Fanon talked about it as the national bourgeoisie, right? This kind of someone who's indigenous maybe to the nation, but also represents the interests of the foreign power, the neo-colonialists, as Kwame Nkrumah put it. So indeed, a lot of the vast majority, I would say, are. So let's keep going. Was there a troll here? Oh, free Cuba, free Hong Kong, free Tibet. All right. Okay. Thanks everyone for taking care of that. Okay, so yeah, no, I don't see any questions here, guys. Who am I rooting for tonight? The NBA. I gotta tell you, I'm an Eastern Conference guy. I'm from Boston, and so I hate the Bucks. I really hate the Bucks because they've been slamming the Celtics for several years now. Whenever they play them, regular season, playoffs, it's been very unfortunate. But I'm rooting for the Bucks only because, and I'll tell you why. Because there's a bit of a political component to this, so I'll talk about it a little bit. If you watch the sports, I watch sports media. My wife and I dabble in it. It's kind of like a nice little wake up thing because they're so obnoxious. Sports media is like the pinnacle of corporate media banter, right? But it's a little more tolerable because it's about sports than like CNN or anything else like that. I don't have to listen to talking heads of the CIA on there, even though ostensibly all of them are influenced by those forces. But I listen to them talk about Giannis Antetokounmpo, and it makes me angry, right? Because there is this incessant nationalism, right? This imperialist nationalism that the LA sports media holds on to. And they talk about Giannis Antetokounmpo as this soft, nice, soft guy who can't get it done. And he's not that talented, even though he's one of the top 5 NBA players in the league. He's not that talented. He's just a hustler. He just out hustles everyone. And there's this very troubling narrative about him that I just can't get over. Yeah, he can't shoot jump shots. Because I was a jump shooter back in high school. I had NBA dreams, and that's what I would do. I would get up at 5 a.m., practice like hell. I mean, one of the reasons why I write so much is because this is how I am. When I do something, I really want to do it. I commit myself. I try to be disciplined. That's how it was when I was playing basketball. That's how it is when I write and when I do my work, my political work, as best I can. Of course, it leads to burnout sometimes, but that's a whole nother story because I did burn out from basketball. So it's always a balance and a struggle. But the way they talk about Giannis, I just can't stomach it. He's a great player. He's killed the Celtics over and over and over again. And I've watched it over and over and over again. He's a great player. He's an amazing player. So the way that he gets hated on by the LA corporate sports media, FS1, for example, to me is just ludicrous. So I don't have really a dog in the fight. I'd love to see Chris Paul get a ring, even though I totally think he's a business unionist with abhorrent politics when it comes to the establishment and how he deals as a union boss with the NBA. He was the one pushing the return early that led to all these injuries, including his own. He was the one talking to Obama to end the strike, right? He's a problem. The State Farm commercials that everyone talks about being so amazing. Dude is literally just selling himself to insurance. So, politically, yeah. But Chris Paul's been playing. He's an amazing player. Deserves to win. That's a long-winded answer to I'm rooting for the Bucks only because I want to see the LA corporate media, sports media, eat their words when it comes to Giannis. I think he just works so hard, and he's got a demeanor that I can relate to, right? He's this like quote unquote nice guy, but also he's like really tough, and he does. I feel like he struggles a lot and works hard. He's disciplined, and he's just not really flashy. He's not the guy that they want to see. He also plays from Milwaukee, which is a quote unquote small market, and so he's not going to make the money, profits, super profits. And so so I'm rooting for him because of all that. Anyway, I'm gonna keep on going because I could talk about the NBA forever. What's going on, Rich? I know you're a fellow patron subscriber. Thanks for coming. Let's see. I don't see any more questions. Yes, somebody said would love to go to Cuba. Bitter Pill. Hello. You should go. I want to go back. It was not long enough. It was so unfortunate that it had to be a short trip. Again, I'm moving again in September, which is going to be, God, I've moved like 7 times. I posted on Twitter. You might have seen it. I've moved like 7 times in the last 7 years. I've worked like 5 jobs in that time. It's been, this is like, I'm a millennial. I'm a working class, quote unquote, working class millennial. I can tell you life is hard, man. I'm not going to say that I'm like suffering to the extent that others are. I know that there are layers to this thing. So, but it's tough, man. It's tough to make all those moves and stuff. And that was happening actually when I had to go to Cuba. I couldn't stay for longer because of ridiculous housing issues. So what books did you read to get where you are, Danny? Hey, whatever, man. Yeah. Well, many books. And actually, the first book I probably read was from, someone who, I won't get into it. He's gone into it on his channel, Dr. Jared Ball, which is fine, but I'm not going to get into it because that's not how I am. I'm not like, so there's been disagreements, but his book, I Mix What I Like, a Mixtape Manifesto, although he's very critical of it, that really exposed me to a lot of these theorists, Frantz Fanon and other revolutionary Black anti-colonial thinkers, Cesare, Amy Cesare, that was very influential for me to be exposed to anti-colonialism. But then, I read books like To Die for the People by Huey Newton, Assata Shakur's autobiography. It was really the Black liberation movement that kind of got me into revolutionary politics first. And there's a very specific reason for that, and I'll get more into more book suggestions. So those are really the first, like To Die for the People by Huey P. Newton, Assata Shakur's autobiography, Dr. Ball's book. And yeah, to be exposed to anti-colonial thinkers and capitalist thinkers and revolutionaries, socialists on the Black left. That was the beginning, and it was very specific. I had a teacher who was in like SDS, a white teacher in like kind of like the SDS Black Power movement scene in DC. And when I was I was here in New York in 2011. Occupy Wall Street was happening. I was interning for a labor union, and I was getting burnt out because, I came into that scene wanting to also, wanting to figure out more about class, but wanting to be true to my origins and getting into the struggle, which were all about race. And I knew it was limited, right? I knew the time I was going in that I needed to learn more about class. I needed to learn more about power, because just focusing on race, which the Democratic Party loves to do, which liberals love to do, neoliberals, it's very limited. It will limit not only your vision, but it will limit your activity. That's what it did for me. So I was burnt out. Just railing against white people doesn't really do much, especially because man, white people will get mobilized, right? They will get ready, send you the threats. That's just how it is. So when I was in New York City, and I know, the labor movement, Occupy Wall Street movement, they were struggling hard with this question of race. And I was just like, man, can we connect the two? Is it possible? Because everyone I grew up with who was black was working class and struggled more than my white counterparts. Is there a way that we can bridge this race versus class and make it about race and class, and what that says about the United States as a society and as a social system? And so my teacher from high school, who, I never really talked about politics before, but we were still close and talking, and he told me about his political experiences, and he suggested I read Huey P. Newton, Black Panther literature. And so I started to do that, and it was really incredibly helpful. And that's how I actually got turned on to internationalism, right? Reading the Black Panther Party's I think it was 1967. Oh man, I might be wrong. I think it might be 1969, where they sent the letter to the National Liberation Front of Vietnam, but I could be wrong about that too. But I read that letter sent by the Black Panther Party offering their bodies to the Vietnamese in the struggle against the United States. And that got me turned on to wanting to figure out, well, why were they doing that? What was the struggle in Vietnam all about? Then they would cite Marx, Lenin, Engels, Mao, Zedong. So I started to read them as well. So I would not hesitate. Read State and Revolution by Vladimir Lenin. Read the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. Read Frederick Engels' State, The Origins of Private Property, the Family, and the State. Read socialist texts, because that's what really did get me to where I am. A lot of people suggest Michael Parenti these days, and I would highly suggest it too. He's very good of succinct analyses of socialism, imperialism. Good for beginners as well. He's very basic. Jesus, sorry about that, guys. There is obviously a lot of activity tonight where I live, so sorry about that. But yeah, I would say those are the books that got me started, and just off what I know. But yeah, Frantz Fanon was very influential for me. A Dying Colonialism was actually, to me, more profound for me than Wretched of the Earth, which everyone suggests, and I also suggest it. But A Dying Colonialism, you get this very firsthand take of what it was like of an anti-colonial struggle, like what was being waged in Algeria at the time, and how Algerians, how the anti-colonial forces organized, and what it meant for social culture, political culture. Those are the kind of books I really like, books like that, where you get a sense of the struggle as it's happening. And, I would highly recommend speeches from Fidel Castro. To me, he's an incredible orator and actually has some great analyses of Latin America and the history. So you can find that at places like Marxist.org, but yeah, no, there's so much. And of course, subscribers to my Patreon have messaged me for these types of requests, and I spend a little bit more time. So that's off the cuff, and I can spend a little bit more time. If you want to email me, you can do that if you can't subscribe to my Patreon. But subscribers on my Patreon know some of them might be here, that if you ask me a question, I try to really answer it as best I can. So that's definitely a good one. Thank you. What can you expect from a left movement that has no continued education of how to be, because they were completely wiped out for almost a century? Oh, that's not really a question. That sounds like a rhetorical question. Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, it's true. It's been a long process of kind of annihilation and repression of the left. And there is a crisis of political education. This economic crisis, this political crisis, it creates a crisis of political education and consciousness as people are becoming more desperate. And when people become more desperate, they're less able to do things like really figure out how to approach white supremacy in the real way. You get confused by the Congressional Black Caucus and the Black Misleadership class that we talk about in Black Agenda Report. They steer politics in the direction of the Democratic Party. And to their so-called woke imperialism, and corporations, nonprofits begin to co-opt the struggle. And then you have ordinary working class people, especially Black working class people, who are honestly the targets of things like mass incarceration and police violence to such high degrees, and then the joblessness, and all of this creates a very difficult terrain from which to organize in. And I've been a labor organizer in unions for a long time in my relatively short life. I mean, I've been, in 3 different unions now, and I can tell you that in that struggle, there has been a lot of repression as well. I mean, some of you may know about the witch hunt and the red baiting and the McCarthyism. The impact of that from beginning in 1919 about all the way into the 1960s. And then by then, the labor movement was pretty much firmly in the hands of what Lenin called the labor aristocracy. That process literally had within it legislation like the Taft-Hartley Act, which cemented red baiting inside of unions, to the point where still to this day, people have to sign papers saying they won't join the Communist Party. And that's had a huge impact because much of the labor leadership is wholly anti-communist and against things like even Medicare for all, this lightweight policy for universal-ish healthcare. They're against because they don't want to see their privileges being lost or their identity of winning mediocre corporate-based insurance and the political connections that bring. You see that a lot of labor leaders actually go against it. So it says my work, he's doing great and he's confirming type. This is the kind of leftist. Hey, thanks, LME. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think one of the things that hurts me, and I think it hurts anyone who's genuinely anti-imperialist. In this moment, it's been the China question, to be honest. If I just talked about Syria, Russia, for example, I think my work would gain a lot more traction. I think the work of a lot of other people would also gain more traction. I have comrades, Carlos Martinez and others, would gain a lot more traction if they weren't so fervently opposed to U.S. imperialism against China and weren't afraid, right? And I think a lot of people are scared. They don't want to admit it, but I know firsthand, and I would never out people. That's just not how I am. But I know firsthand from doing this, I pitch, guys. I throw it out there. Hey, guys, let's talk about this issue. And some people say, yeah. But I can tell you I've had experiences where my work literally doesn't go up after, let's say, a live stream because it's China, because, ratio time, right? So that is a huge predicament, and it's one that we haven't figured out yet. So, yeah, I mean, I would love to have a higher profile, only in the sense that this would move the movement forward. I'm not really looking for that for myself, to be honest. I don't want to be, I'll just say it outright. I don't want to be a YouTuber with hundreds of thousands of subscribers and doing that. That's just it's not me. But yeah, whatever will get the work out there is certainly I'm all for. Whatever will get the politics out there. I don't see many questions. This isn't Ask Me Anything, guys, so you can definitely do that. We're coming up on the hour. Definitely, if you have any more questions, you can email me. Go to Black Agenda Report, find my email. I don't wakeupriseUp1990@gmail.com. But definitely subscribe to my Patreon, helps, and I'm much more responsive over that because all of our emails are inundated with garbage now. But also, yeah, it's just a lot harder for me to keep up through that. But I check my Patreon a lot more. So I don't see many other question marks. Nobody cares about Saga or Crystal's hit take. Are they really hit? I mean, yeah, it's true. Like, we for sure need to do better with leveraging these platforms for the movement and for the struggle for liberation. That's why I'm on here. I mean, I'm not on here to just pontificate. Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks, Vega. I agree with that. Yeah, I do want a higher following, but yeah, YouTube, yeah, these platforms are not going to let us get it, right? We have to come together. And I advocate that actually in a recent article that, it was very important for me to write because I was feeling so, at this time when I wrote it, it's a June 16th article. It's titled Independent Media's Political to a Defense of State or Publicly Funded Media. And in that, I talk a lot about individualism, right? And how that really fuels a lot of what happens here on YouTube, even amongst the most left of us. And we talk about the Rising and Crystal and Sagar. They were working for a corporate outlet. They were making decisions, and to be honest, Sagar was always he's right wing. I mean, he was conservative populism. They make up so many terms, but he's very explicit about where he stands on things, and that's the one thing I guess I appreciate. But if we don't understand where that means he's not really for the working classes, not really for the oppressed. He says he's for the working class, but all of his solutions would never lead to anything good for the working class. Oh, bring all the production home. Sorry, that's not how capitalism works. We need socialism. Oh no, we can't have socialism because China, because communism, because this. We can have universal healthcare somehow under far right or right wing presidents. It doesn't make any sense, but we have to just be honest about what we're trying to do, and people don't want to do that because that's bad for brands. I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, I know that a lot of folks, this is their world, but a lot of us, I mean, a lot of you who are watching this, myself, we got to work in jobs, shit jobs, right? These post-industrial neoliberal capitalist jobs, low wage, and they don't pay enough. So we got to do that. And those who are trying to make careers out of this thing, or who have already made careers out of this thing, they have to negotiate a lot. So, when people, so they see China and they see China's getting a lot of negative attention and it could hurt their algorithms and ratios and all that. And they say, nah, I can't talk about China. But me, I'm sorry, but 1.4 billion people and the future of humanity in the world, and which direction should the world go in, and potentially stopping a nuclear proliferation, that's very important to me. So I'm always going to talk about China for as long as U.S. imperialism exists. I know that that's going to be a huge it's just going to be a huge point of contention, and it's going to just shape so much. So yeah, no, I am never going to compromise my politics for whatever goes on here, but for sure we need to negotiate this, figure it out. So yeah, what perspectives are most needed in left media right now, in your opinion? What's missing in the leftist conversation? What needs more attention? Oh, you're asking huge questions, LME, but you know what? They are incredible questions. Okay. What needs more attention in the left media? Well, I will say that I'm a communist, so I'm very explicit about that politically. I'll say that I think this question of socialism and communism needs better attention. Because honestly, this model, and I don't disrespect, I think there are very talented journalists out there, people who I call dear friends and even comrades, right? Who are doing news, who are doing, I'm not a newsy guy. I'll comment on all the news, but I'm not going to report the news. And I think there's been an overemphasis on that because that will build followers and channels and whatever. But we need analysis, and we need analysis on these big questions, like white supremacy, for example. White supremacy, right? I don't want to hear this awful debate that I've had to listen to because I was trying to keep my ear to the Bernie followers, Sanders followers, these Democratic Party left-ish elements. I was trying to pay attention to what they were doing, where they would go, how I could insert myself and try to push things forward. We wanted to, I mean, Margaret and I talk about this a lot. We want to create a break, a rupture from the Democratic Party because that's what we need so bad. But I had to hear over and over and over again, the white working class, race is so divisive. Why are we talking about race? Oh, but black young people, they are for everything that Bernie Sanders is for. So race is not really an issue. And it just drove me it just ate at me because it was a total avoidance of a real question. A real question that the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, is very attentive to, which is racism and white supremacy. They know that this is the central contradiction of the United States. The bourgeoisie knew that they had to respond to the millions of people who marched in the streets and the protesters who burned the Minneapolis police station down. They had to pay attention to them because they knew over the course of the United States' history, it's always been the struggle for black liberation that has represented the biggest threat to the upkeep and the maintenance of this imperialist and racist empire, this imperialist, capitalist, and racist empire. That's the truth. But if the left, and unfortunately much of the left who's most vocal out here, it's mainly the white left, they want to avoid white supremacy. They don't want to talk about it. They don't even want to debate it. They don't see it. Some of them probably don't see it as their place to. They don't want to divide. They think that, I mean, a lot of people think that Trump supporters or something are going to come onto their side for some of the Bernie Sanders social democrat-ish demands like Medicare for all, that they're all going to bring this big coalition that's going to bring this about. Fantasy world. This shows a detachment from material reality. What really, you don't need even a lot of people to come together around these things. You just need a critical mass of people, of those who are the most advanced, to then take others with you. You don't approach things as I'm going to capitulate to the right by avoiding white supremacy and act like that's not going to have consequences. It has big consequences. And so we need to talk about white supremacy in a real way, as a root cause, as a root problem, as I hate the word systemic, but a systemic problem, as inherent to capitalism itself, right? Malcolm X said, there is no racism without capitalism, right? So until we address racism, we can't address capitalism. The reason why we don't have Medicare for all, the reason why we don't have a quote unquote Green New Deal, the reason why we've never had universal policies in the United States other than Social Security and Medicare, which honestly had difficult roots themselves, and even just being able to get off the ground and be a universal policy for everybody. There's rampant discrimination based on job classification that affected Black people. And, you know, we know that job discrimination ensures that Black people make the least on Social Security. But it's racism and white supremacy, which literally creates the seeds for the most vicious kind of austerity that exists here in the United States. And no one's talking about it. So that's one thing I really hope. And I want to be a part of that. I want, of course, more so my Black comrades and my comrades from oppressed nationalities and sectors of society around the world to be a part of that conversation and lead it. But that's what needs to happen. That's what I think needs to happen next in the media sphere. And so, you know, in my article, I can also just talk about LME, you know, in that question that you asked, what needs to be focused on, you know, in my article about independent media is political too. I talk about we have an opportunity in this struggle against imperialism and how imperialism has gone after quote unquote state affiliated media. I ask readers and I ask people who ingest independent media, follow it, to remember that we are right now at the apex of privatization here in the United States, that these platforms are really a product of media privatization. So when we talk about the Telecommunications Act and all these mergers and these multinational corporations, media corporations, we're talking about being at the most advanced stage of privatization and imperialism. And that's affected the media to the point where we are using these platforms to try to leverage them for our struggles. But we need to think beyond that. We need to think about a vision of how we work together, right? Organizationally. Without organization and political struggles and mass movements, there is no movement, right? Mobilization won't do it. Advocacy doesn't do it. You need to be organized. And so the media, independent media, folks, we need to figure that out. And I want to be a part of that in the future, as we continue to do our work. How do we come together and learn some lessons? And I think for me, I propose just one example of how we could start to have a conversation about what public media would look like again, what a people's media would look like, because we've never had a people's media. We've had public media. We ostensibly have it here in the United States now, but it's not very public and it's not much. It's also a byproduct of nefarious forces. And you know what I'm talking about. PBS, NPR, they only have like 30% or less of their budgets funded publicly, and the rest come from private NGOs and corporate donors and military contractors. And so they're also beholden to corporations. But what would it mean for us to have a people's media, a public media? And I say, first, get in the battle to defend state-affiliated media. China, Cuba, Russia, Iran, all have quote unquote state-owned media. And I just want to ask people, what do they think that is? CGTN, Xinhua in China, Press TV in Iran, RT. They're not all 100% public, but they are public media organizations in the sense that the government has a majority stake in those companies. And that means that they're nationalized. That means that the state is in control. And so we should get to defending that. That's part of the reason why they're demonized. It's not just because they're repeating the government's messages, right? And then undermining democracy, like RT is accused of a lot, CGTN, etc. Xinhua was one of the first organs of the Communist Party of China before the revolution. I think it was founded in 1936 during the Long March. Zhou Enlai was a huge part of founding that. He ran the paper for a while. Deng Xiaoping, everyone loves Deng Xiaoping in the United States. A lot of these so-called Maoists hate him, but he was huge in as an editor of a lot of major media outlets that the Communist Party was running to reach the masses of people. And so a lot of the state-owned outlets that you hear of, they have roots like that. I don't know about RT, but they have roots in processes, anti-imperialist processes. So we need to defend them and then understand what it means to be public and for the people in a way that's organized. We can do our own projects. We can have our own projects, and that's fine. But if we're not organized, then we aren't going to have the impact that we need to have. We're not going to be able to reach as many people. We need to be connected to movements and people's struggles. And so that's what I hope we can focus on. So that, I would say, LME, is what needs more attention. So I answer your question, big questions with, I hope, pretty big answers that I honestly don't even have the answer to questions about what that would look like. But we're going to work on it together. We're going to get through this together. So I don't see any other questions. I've been on here for a while now, almost an hour and 15 minutes. I'm a basketball fan, so I want to watch the game. My wife's out with friends, a few are staying over, and I am probably going to peace out. But with that said, I'm going to have a lot of announcements coming up for me personally, because I will need more support. Economic situation, again, tight, tough. New York City's expensive as hell, and I put in a lot of work. And so I'm hoping that people will help me out a little bit more as I put in more hours to this kind of work. I'm hoping to take a little bit of a break this coming fall, maybe the winter. And yeah, with that said, I'm going to have announcements coming up. I'll share them publicly as much as I can, but I share them mostly with subscribers on Patreon about these kind of things. But I'll share them publicly as it's appropriate. But Margaret and I are discussing. We're trying to pin down a date to have Jemima Pierre, who's a great friend of Black Agenda Report, talk about Haiti. That's coming up. And my next article, I'm going to talk about some economics. So I'm going to talk about why Joe Biden is wrong and capitalist competition is in fact exploitation. He recently, with these really weak regulations that he proposed as an executive order, which who knows how far those will go, but some things about mergers and some things that will maybe imports from Canada, medicines help a little bit, certainly will help a little bit, not a lot, won't change the calculus at all in the United States. It won't really improve people's lives significantly, but it will probably do enough to keep his approval rating high enough among liberals to remain legitimate. Maybe it'll strengthen the hand of the Democrats in the midterms, maybe, just maybe. But the point is that I am going to be talking about capitalism and competition. Now, capitalist competition, despite what libertarians want to tell you, everyone, capitalist competition is inherently exploitative. It inherently leads to monopoly and to imperialism, because capitalists are looking to cut costs. They're looking to cut workers. They're looking to make super profits. They're looking to consolidate technology, because technology is money. It's not just innovation. It's money. It's capital. It's organic. It's the organic composition of capital, which is what Marx talks about a lot. And so I'm going to explain these things and explain why Joe Biden is wrong about capitalist competition, so you can follow that article coming out next week. I come out with previews of my articles on Patreon every week. I give a little snippet for you all. I'll try to take snippets maybe of this live stream as well and get those out. But yeah, it's going to be quite hectic. Still looking for apartments and stuff for next month in September. So yeah, thanks to everyone for coming. Appreciate. Yes, and just call me toast. What you say about capitalism there, increase in production reduces prices, means they have to sell more beyond the national market. But capitalism already, and I'll explain this in the article, it already does that. Overproduction is inherent to the system. So the more capitalists cannot possibly sell back the value that's produced by workers, because workers cannot possibly consume that value. And that leads to these cyclical crises. But as production costs increase, right, of course, capitalists are looking to offset those costs, but there's only so much you can do, and that weighs down profits in the aggregate. So you have Jeff Bezos, and read the article, but you have Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffett. They're getting massively rich. They're getting massively rich during a pandemic and an economic crisis because they're siphoning from speculation and super exploitation like Amazon. But in the aggregate, profits for the capitalist class as a whole end up going down, because in effect, this competition, this monopoly, this race to invest in technology to increase exploitation actually ends up being a drag on the system. They call it the fall in the rate of profit. Very interesting concept that I love a lot to discuss, but maybe for another time. But yeah, so one can get super chats with the number Danny has. Yeah, I don't. We haven't monetized this channel. It's a point of debate and contention. There's pros and cons. We will continue to discuss it though, and yeah, maybe we'll do that soon. But that's why I always say support Black Agenda Report directly and support my Patreon directly. I think that's the best way to help. I know not everyone can do monthly, but that's the best way to help if you can. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And have a good night. And yeah, peace out, everyone.